So we are recording a conversation for the IgboConference in London. This is an annual event. It's organized by and for the Igbo diaspora to celebrate and honor the language, culture, and achievements of the Igbo people. It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Ijoma Mangold from Germany. Welcome, Mr. Mangold.
Thank you. Nice being with you.
Ijoma Mangold is the son of a German mother and a Nigerian Igbo father. He was born in Heidelberg, where he grew up. Today, he belongs to Germany's uppermost social strata and intellectual elite. Mangold has chaired the literary section of Germany's prestigious weekly Die Zeit from 2013 to 2018, and continues as the paper's cultural political commentator. He also serves as a literary critic for Southwest German radio TV station. Mr. Mangold is a highly recognized literary critic and holds a distinguished position in Germany's intellectual circles. Mr. Mangold's book, Das Deutsche Krokodil, the German Crocodile, it's here, hope you can see it, is scheduled to appear in England on October 1st. His book narrates his personal history and is the subject of our conversation today. Mr. Mangold, I loved reading your book, by the way, for many, many reasons. It is complex and multifaceted. It pays homage to your mother, very important. And it opens a window in contemporary German society. Your story reads like a Bildungsroman. Of course, it's not a novel, it's your personal history, because you're narrating your personal history of becoming who you are today. I loved reading your book. It is interesting, informative, witty, funny, and sad all at once. What struck me when I started reading your book was the title of your first section, The Boy. Why are you writing about your own personal childhood in the third person, kind of like from the perspective of another person looking down at the kid?
Yeah, first of all, I have to apologize my awkward English, but I try my best. I can assure you my book is written in a better style in German than my talking in English. Yeah, the third person question is interesting. When I started the childhood chapter, I actually started also what is the matter, of course, in the first person. And then I realized if you write about yourself, if you have an autobiographical subject, the exciting moments are those that are connected with shame or even pain. No, that's too much for me, I would say, but with shame. And I realized if I switch to the third person, this Ijoma, this protagonist, at that moment changes in somehow in a literary figure. I'm not writing about myself, me, I'm writing about this figure, that this protagonist who is essential for that book, and that gives you sort of a freedom or a distance, a good distance I could use then to write about aspects of his emotions or his thoughts. I probably would have hesitated to express if I had put it in the first person. But there was also another, it was an inspiration at the same time for this perspective and that special tone, and that is the remember the memories of Kutsi. He also wrote in the third person about himself and used
The present tense.
present tense. Yes,
Present.
yes, yes. And the combination of third person and present tense was very appealing to me, and I took it from Kutsi, who I admire very much.
Great. Your story of becoming reminded me of Michelle Obama's book, Becoming, even though her background, of course, is very different from your own. Mm-hmm. Do you see any similarities or rather differences?
I haven't read Becoming yet, but as far as I'm informed about her biography, I would suppose that the similarities to her husband are much bigger. And of course, the biography of Barack Obama was very interesting for me because he, it should not sound presumptuous, but he and me, we share one experience growing up in a culturally white environment by being Black. And that is what characterized, I would say, my experience as a child and a young person. I was completely socialized within a white society, and in a way they didn't even realize, or it was not a big subject that I somehow looked different. Michelle Obama, of course, was completely influenced by this the struggle of the American Black community, and that this community has its own cultural forms and their special habitus, their special remembrances, and Barack Obama was always a very free person in that sense. You could not reduce him to his roots, because his roots were somehow spread all over the world. I mean, he lived with his mother and their second husband, I guess, even in Indonesia. Then he lived he spent a lot of time, if I remember it right, in Hawaii with his white grandparents. I think the similarities to Barack Obama in terms of what it means being Black in a white surrounding society is more important.
Yeah, that's a very, very good, important point you're making, because you have also in your book indicated that you resist any labeling, because it would be too simplistic somehow to label you in that category. And
yes, right now in these days, I would reject this kind of labeling. But at the time when I was a young boy, the situation was very different. We did not have identity politics. So the idea that I could have some idea about myself in terms of identity politics would have been absolutely ridiculous, because in Heidelberg, where I grew up, there were no other German Africans. So to have a consciousness about your own identity as being part of a collective group identity, you need other people with somehow similar roots.
Right.
But they were not there. For this reason, this is quite funny, I think. There were not even racial prejudice against me, because that is in order for a society to have racial prejudice, there must be a group of people. So you think, okay, they always act like this or they always act like that. But I was a singularity. There was only one Nigerian German boy. He was in a way exotic, so people would maybe look at me. I don't know. I don't remember it exactly. But they had not a set of prejudice because of my singularity, and therefore, of course, I never felt like being part of a group. That changed for the first time when I traveled after finishing high school. I traveled for 7 months to the United States, and I stayed in Brooklyn with a now very close friend, older friend. He was a priest in Brooklyn, and he was African American. And he tried to, and we were very close. We really we shared a lot of things we enjoyed, like classical music and stuff like this. But there was one point he was not content with me. He always thought I missed a consciousness of my blackness. And I said, Edward, how could I have this consciousness? Because therefore you need a community of which you are part of. I've never been, because there was no Black community at that time in the 70s or 80s in Western Germany.
Well, it's actually interesting because you're talking about Germany, which has obviously very different history than the United States. I mean, today, you know, there's a lot of, because of the group perception and the group's history, there is a lot of racism in America. Germany, of course, also had a very racist past. And it seems, the way you're describing it in your book, it seems that the country has gradually moved away from its racist past. So what, if anything, has changed in Germany? Do you think this is only your individual experience because there was no other African German group, or is there a change in the society in terms of open-mindedness, maybe, or being less racist or whatever? Did you experience that?
I like to try to give you the less simple answer. I think there is no single answer to your question. There are a lot of different factors that we have to consider. First of all, I mean, the racism that is part of the German history had a very, it was a general racism as well, but it has a very specific object, and those were the Jews. Mm-hmm. So being Jewish in Germany after the World War II is something different because of our past than being Black or mixed race. I grew up in a very, in a city that was, the atmosphere was influenced by the university. So in a way, we were a cosmopolitan city, Heidelberg. I guess it's the German city with the oldest university. At the same time, because the consciousness of our past was so strong, I would say the West German society tried to be not racist at all because they knew that went wrong the last time, we shouldn't repeat it. But of course, if you look different or you come from a different cultural background and you come to you enter a society which has her own ideas of the normal, then it's always a little bit irritating. People have to deal with this. And this changed over the last 3 decades, I would say, but not because of the moral progress, only because the reality changed. I mean, in the 70s, when my mom decided to have a child with a Nigerian doctor, that was quite an unlikely or unusual decision. And therefore, I was somehow, as I said it, an exotic singularity. So people were, for instance, always very curious what kind of story is behind this boy. Where does he come from? Or they were, of course, in different contexts surprised that I spoke such a nice German, because their idea was, if you don't look German, you probably don't speak perfect German. Now we think all these things are ridiculous, I know, but when you are at the beginning of a transformation of the society where people who look different are not the rule, of course you have to learn it. Now it is the rule. Now also Germany is a multicultural city, multicultural country, and we have a lot of migration, and not every German has blue eyes and blonde hairs any longer. And therefore, of course, we have a progress in defining ourselves in a new way. I would say. I guess it's very hard to compare experiences of racism from country to country. First of all, there is no clear reference where you can measure it. We all make our own experiences, and I always think it's very important that every experience one makes is valuable. I would never argue a different view of Germany, a different experience. But at the same time, I think also my own experience is worth to be told. And my experience is not that I grew up in a racist country, not at all. I would lie if I say I made ever any negative experience, for instance, in my career or something like this. I would say on the opposite, on the contrary. I think looking different was always an advantage for me, because people took notice of me. People, it was like, because I didn't look like all the other Germans, it was worth remembering me in a way like this. So, so my experience I made were positive ones. I have friends, I read different voices who say the opposite, of course, and even those voices will describe some kind of reality. People or individuals make different experiences with the same reality in which they live.
Of course, very true. Do you think that German attitudes differ along the lines of, apart from individual personal experiences, but do you think there are differences along the lines of race, class, gender, and education, maybe?
Of course. Like I suppose that 80% of all the racial issues we talk about nowadays are actually issues of social class and not of racism. And of course, how you be treated depends on the social environment you live in. But at the same time, I would say my grandmother lived in a very small village in the Black Forest. There lived like 700 people, really small village. There no academic background at all. And I spent all my vacations as a small child with my grandmother in that small village. And I have only the nicest memories to this time, to this place. So I would not say like racism becomes stronger the less educated people are. I don't think so, no.
Can't say so either. You had a very happy childhood, and so you're describing it, and your mother has really shielded you from lots of negative stuff, which you found out after her death, actually.
Yeah.
And she has also nourished your German identity. And as a small boy, I think you were not aware of differences really between you and the other children. If anybody was different, it was your mother. I mean, you wrote about your mother, the rug she had in the apartment, the carpet, and so on. But still, when your mother's African-American friend, Yvonne, came to visit from the United States, you felt a little bit uneasy about accompanying this Black woman to the post office.
Absolutely, and not only a little bit.
Well, and then you had the sentence in your book, which struck me. You wrote something like, you were a professional at adapting. No, you know why this struck me so much is because my daughter was 5 years old when we moved from Berlin to New York.
Yeah.
And she had to adapt, of course, to the strange country, foreign country and language environment. And she earned the nickname Master Adapter. And it reminded me so much when you said you wrote about yourself, you were a professional at adapting. Of course, then I start asking, since when and why was being a master adapter important for you to thrive in your own country? I mean, I could see my daughter in a foreign country with a foreign language, but you were in your own country, you were fluent in the language. So when did you start having the feeling that you have to adapt to what, or, you know?
I guess, but this is a psychology. I don't know who really knows oneself. You can only try to understand yourself. I suppose that I started being a master adapter quite early. The reason for this was a child likes to be part of the environment he lives in. A child adores or loves normality. Everything should be normal. I remember very good that the friends of my mother always said to me, "You have such a special, courageous mother. She is very unconventional. She makes everything the way she thinks it is right. She never listens to other people or to the society. She is a real individual." And as a child, I always thought, yes, it's true, but that's not a good thing. I would like it the other way around. Like my grandmother. My grandmother always said, if I did something wrong, she said, was werden die anderen sagen? What will the other people say about this? And I liked that sentence very much. At that time, as a child, I was convinced you should act in a way that the other people don't think anything about you. My mother was different. My mother was completely opposite of this. And as a child, I thought that is a weakness. I thought my mother and me as a family, we would be stronger if we were more normal. Mm-hmm. But by being normal, it was the thing I thought about was not in the first place the color of my skin. It was more like only growing up with a mother and there is no father. Oh, yeah. The fact that my father left us, went back to Nigeria when I was 1 year old. So I grew up only with my mother. At that time in the 70s, it was not very usual being a single mother. And so for me, as a child, I remember I was afraid that this concept of our life is maybe not stable enough. Not that much because my father comes from Nigeria, but much more because there was no father. And then I admit this, of course, out of discussion. Then there was a second thing that had to do with not being normal. For instance, my first name. And the first name is always very important if you meet a new person. If two new persons meet each other, they both nervous. And then there is a ritual. The ritual is you say your name, the other one says his or her name. And then you're a little bit more relaxed. I was not relaxed at all, because when I said what my first name was, I knew how the other person would react. She or he would say, "Oh, please repeat it. How do you pronounce your name?" And of course they said, "Oh, what a special, wonderful name. I would like to have such a special name. It's much better than if you have a normal, ordinary name like Stefan or Andreas or whatever." But I didn't like to have a special first name. I would have preferred to have a very normal name, so there's no complication if I meet another child. And the third point, of course, was my hair and my skin, and it was not that the society mirrored something, a bad experience to me. It was more like deep in my heart, I was convinced looking different than all the other people is a disadvantage. I never made, I said already, I never made actual bad experiences, But even as a child, I thought it is always better if you look like all the other people. And since I did not look like the other people, I had to compensate. I had to compensate this. And I would say one mean of compensation was speaking a very clear, we don't have like in English, we don't have an upper class accent or something like this in German. We have no social accents, I would say. But I speak a frightening clear German. And of course, in the 70s and maybe even in the 80s, sometimes if I went to a shop and like the bakery and the clerk did see me, they sometimes talk to me like I would be a stranger who doesn't speak very good German. And of course, then I made my order in a very complicated, long and clear German sentence. So everybody knew immediately, oh, okay, he doesn't look like a German, but he really speaks like a German. And I guess this was an attempt of compensation, yes.
Yeah, compensation.
And I could continue. I don't know if it's true, but the fact that in my adolescence, my favorite artist and musician was Richard Wagner, and in literature, Thomas Mann, gives you a hint. Both are, in a very deep sense, very German artists. And somehow, maybe I enjoyed to play with that fact that a person who doesn't look German incorporates all these German traditions in a very strong way. Yeah.
Well, you chose the best high school in town, and during your high school years, you belonged to a very popular group, upper group in the school, and you kept moving upwards, and within the school and also beyond. And eventually, you joined Germany's intellectual elite, which is way above, the average German school kid, so to speak. So, who and what propelled you? Was it only your desire to fit in, but you scooped higher up? So there must be something that drove you to excellence.
Of course, I mean, the literature is full of biographies of social upgrade. We even have a ugly word for it, the parvenu. And if we talk of the parvenu, like Balzac wrote a lot of protagonists in Balzac's novels are parvenus, or Stendhal, Black and Red, is also the story of a parvenu, of a person who comes from low and goes to the upper circles of society. But at the same time, you could say this is a very social democratic idea. I mean, we are free and open society, so people should have the possibility to invent themselves and go for those goals they like. No one knows why one became the person he or she is. Neither do I. My enthusiasm was always for culture, for literature, for musician. I guess if your main goal is getting to the top of society, there are other ways or means you would probably choose. But being enthusiastic about literature and music, I'm afraid I'm an entertainer in a way, because I talk too much, and I do a little bit television, and I like very much having a podcast. So the aspect of entertaining I enjoy, I would say. And I even would say, as a journalist or as a literary critic, you have to entertain. It's not only about having the best arguments and the truth about the aesthetic value of a novel. You also have to present it in a way people enjoy and continue reading. I grew up without my father. So I had no idea about Nigerian culture. I was not socialized by a Nigerian father, only by my German mother. We had no contact to my father. He was a non-person to me. I had no bad thoughts about him. I had no thoughts about him. And when I was 22, all of a sudden I found an envelope in my letterbox, and it was a letter from my father. After 22 years, he had decided to say hello. And he invited me to his country, and he told me that my oldest half-sister, Ikuna, that she studied in the city I grew up in, Heidelberg. At that time, I lived already in Munich. So all of a sudden, I met my half-sister. And then we traveled together to Nigeria. That was the first time I entered Nigerian ground. So if you ask, are you interested in African history? Definitely not at all till I was 22. When I then arrived in Nigeria, my first reaction was, went in a totally different direction, because I made the experience that my Igbo family, they wanted me to be now part of their family, and an important part, because my father was a doctor. He had a hospital. He was chief in his village. And his idea was, he actually had lost 2 sons to sickle cell disease. The second son he lost like 1 year before he wrote that letter to me. At that point, he had only 4 daughters. And since my impression of Igbo culture is that they are very patriarchal, yeah, he was missing a son and a predecessor. And therefore, he had plans with me. And I was 22 or 23 years old, and I was culturally completely German, and I enjoyed my life, and I was not missing anything. And I had the fear that my Nigerian family is like grabbing after me and trying to put me to Nigeria. And I had softly to tell them that the center of my life is and will be Germany. So in that phase, my interest for African history was neither that big, but it changed maybe even 10 further years, because then I realized, oh no, this is such a big operation, such a big chance that you have this Nigerian family, and I had close contact to my sisters, and especially to Ikuna, because she then moved to England and worked there as a doctor. And at that point, I also started, of course, reading African literature and reading about African history. And maybe around 2010, 2011, I would say there was an upspring of African writers who wrote in English and had at least one foot in the United States. And I like Taya Selassie. She wrote a wonderful novel about her Nigerian Ghana family. And for me, it was a very interesting idea when she talked about Afropolitans. It was a way of describing Black biographies not as victims, but as master of their life. And I like that very much. And then I met Teju Cole. He's also Nigerian, but lives in New York. He's maybe one of the most brilliant writer world literature has. Or of course, the very famous Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, also Nigerian. I like her very much. I admire her literature. So all of a sudden, African literature was very present worldwide through those figures, and in this developments I'm very interested in, I would say, yes.
So you are very interested and engaged in exchange with African authors, African literature. You mentioned Adichie. That's very interesting because I'm sure you have heard her wonderful TED talk, "The Danger of a Single Story."
Yes, of
Yeah.
course, yeah. And I could subscribe every sentence. What I don't like is the tyranny of a single story, and therefore I'm against identity politics, because I think identity politics also tends to act like there is only a single story, but there are always much more different stories you can tell about a person, about a culture, and about the history.
Yeah, and about an individual. You can really constitute your own identity in a way.
There is not a single identity, and
Exactly,
therefore it is so, it makes a person poorer if that person describes himself or herself only under one aspect. Like, of course, I have black skin, but that doesn't tell only, I don't know, 1% about my character, I would guess.
Right, of course not.
I arrived in Nigeria, and I mean, they were very smart, educated people. They knew that I lived for my whole life in Germany, but nevertheless, they were convinced not only that I am Nigerian, but also that I feel Nigerian.
Oh, yeah.
And I was surprised, because why should I feel Nigerian? Because the only Nigerian input I had at that time was the blood of my father. But since the category of blood plays a major role in Igbo society, they were convinced, okay, of course, he must feel Igbo. It was a very interesting experience to me. My oldest sister, Ikuna, I told about her already. She, as I said, studied medicine in Heidelberg. So she had at least she lived there 10 years, had a lot of German experiences. But she was, in a way, always a little bit unhappy with her brother, that he doesn't embrace more his Nigerian identity. Then she went to England. She married a Nigerian doctor, and they had 2 children, my niece and my nephew. My niece and my nephew, they are 100%, they have 100% Nigerian blood. I only have 50% Nigerian blood. My niece and my nephew were, at least in the realm of their home, socialized in a Nigerian way, because their father and their mother is Nigerian. I had only a German socialization. And my niece and my nephew, if you talk to them and if you ask them, they have no idea about Nigeria, and they feel 100% British. And when my sister had to realize that her own children were not Nigerian but British, she understood for the first time why I couldn't embrace the Nigerian identity, not in the way they were expecting me to do it. And that was an interesting experience for both of us. Then she had more patience with me.
It's a very interesting, yeah. I mean, of course there is this old discourse, anthropological discourse, what is more important, nature or nurture? And of course, nature is, your physical heritage, and nurture is your social and psychological and educational nurture. And you had a very strong your German identity is nurtured by your education and your socialization and your psychology and all that. Your natural paternal heritage is Igbo.
Yeah.
Question: is it possible to manage the two, and how can you do it? Can you make a combination of it, create a new urban intellectual person who draws on different influences? I mean, for example, can you be nourished by Igbo intellectual life, which is quite strong. There's a lot of ideas.
Definitely, of course, yeah. But, and this is maybe not a common opinion, but it's my personal experience, I would make the side of nature stronger than I thought before. In a way, my father and the Igbo culture with their belief in blood, they are not that wrong as I thought. Because a lot of my habits, my mimic expression, the kind of gestures I make, they are very similar to the way my father acts. So although I did not grow up with my father, the way I laugh, the way I smile, I make the same facial expressions like my father. And even in terms of character, like my mother was in a way always very humble and modest, and not interested in social success, the subject we talked about before. My father, on the contrary, and if I look at me, I'm much more like my father, though I did not grow up with him. So I think even part of our character is conveyed by genetics, I guess.
I think that traditional European and especially German thought is so monolithic. Everything, I mean, in the German thinking and European thinking, there's only one mother, one father, one truth, one law, one God, one race, one identity, one religion, whatever. It's always one. But it's conceivable in other cultures, for example, to have multiple deities. Let's think of India. You can have more than one father. You can have more than one mother, actually, as I learned in Nigeria. And it is possible to create a new multi-complex identity if you are able to absorb some of these ideas. And there is a lot of mobility actually in Europe today among different nations, and you find people from different countries identifying simultaneously with different countries and different ethnicities. So how do you manage? I mean, you're a complex person. How do you manage living in this sort of monolithic world of thinking in Germany?
I don't think that we live in in this kind of monolithic thinking, because I mean, how would you describe the state of mind of the last 4 decades? You could describe it with the term postmodernism. What is postmodernism? It is nothing other than to say we are multi-perspective. There is no single story. There are a lot of stories to tell, and there's not one truth that is binding us. At the same time, Europe has also a very rich polytheistic history. Before we invented Christianity, the Greeks and the Romans believed in a pluriversum of gods that was in a way already postmodern. But at the same time, I would say monotheistic religion has also great advantages. It's not that easy to say there is the monotheistic, monolithic tradition, and there is the postmodern polytheistic tradition, which is superior. That would be too easy. But one thing is clear. In the globalized world and society we live in now, we are always confronted with very different ways of living, very different cultures, very different values. And we already developed the skill to deal with this very good, I would say. It is a challenge. How could it be different? It is a challenge for everyone. But I think we make very great big success in this. I don't know, I would never say this new kind of thinking is morally superior to the older ways, because this is just development of history. There is no better or worse. We have new situations, we have new realities, and therefore we have a new thinking. I mean, it doesn't make sense for a person in the 19th century to be multiculturalist, because the societies were quite homogeneous. Now societies become more and more heterogeneous. Therefore, you need a thinking, a philosophy that fits to that new situation. I always have difficulties with judging the past for the fact that the past did not think the way we think today, because we should know in 20 years people will look at us and think, oh, what an old-fashioned thinking. They will not think, oh, they were really very woke in the year of 2020. No, they will say terrible things they thought at that time. How happy we are that we made progress. So values are relative, of course. That's the main thing I like to say. Values are very relative.
What are your plans for your future? For the future, are you writing a new? I've read your book, Der politische, der
innere Stammtisch.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I love it.
Yeah, so far, I mean, writing books is such a strong and satisfying experience, and very different from writing for the newspaper. I enjoy being a journalist and to have the possibility to intervene in the debates of our time is part of my life, and I enjoy it. But writing a book means it's like meditation. You detach from all the noise around you, and you follow only your own thought and your own narrative you like to tell, and that is very, very satisfying. So my plans for future is only, I hope that I can keep writing own books. And so far my two books were both very narrative, but they were fiction, they were non-fiction. And I have to admit, I think I would like to test it if I can also write fiction, because then you even freer to express what you like to say, I guess.
Yeah, and you're such a prolific writer. I mean, it's really fun. I mean, I really enjoyed reading your book so much, and I'm sure it's going to be very, very interesting if you write a novel or something. Your book, the German Crocodile, really is an inspiration. I found it very, very inspiring, because I think it really encourages the reader to explore and shape one's own complexities. You know, the complexities of the identity and the belongings and the history, and also the way forward. It's a very, very complex and very beautiful book. And I really congratulate you. And I want to thank you for being you, and for your wonderful book, and for sharing your experiences with us. Thank you.
Thank you, and I thank you for the wonderful conversation we had.
Well, we tried. Thank you. And we also like to thank the IgboConference for organizing this conversation online. I hope it will, I'm sure it will have, we have many interested audiences. And I also want to note one more time that your book, German Crocodile, will be available in English. And it's already available for pre-order on Amazon as the German Crocodile by Ijoma Mangold. Thank you.